Committee will come to order. I now recognize, we'll start back in order. I think Mr. Swalwell completed our first session this morning. We'll now hear from the chairman of the subcommittee on transportation, Mr. Jimenez from Florida, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question is to Secretary Mayorkas. Secretary Mayorkas, when President Biden first came into office, one of the first things he did is he changed all the Trump-era policies related to the southern border. Did you agree with those changes?
Congressman,
that's a yes or no answer, sir. Please. I don't have much time. Did you agree with them or not?
Congressman, he changed some of the policies, and I do agree with those changes.
Okay, and subsequent to that, have you had a number of conversations with the president when you're making substantive changes or implementing new policies at the border? Have you relayed that to the president, and the president, has he said that he's in agreement with your recommendations, or has he made recommendations to you and said, or actually given you orders and said, no, I want to do this? Do you agree with everything, that all the policies that have been implemented since you've been the Secretary of Homeland Security?
Congressman, I'm not going to get into the specifics of my conversations with the president, but please rest.
That's fair enough. I'm going to reclaim my time. Thank you very much. So apparently, I don't know if you talked to the president or not. Fair enough. So either you do things on your own or you do things in consultation with the president. You're still part of his administration. There's a lot been said about the funding of DHS. And so in fiscal year 2020, there were 458,000 encounters at the border. In fiscal year 2021, there was 1,734,686 encounters at the border. That's a 400% increase. There was no really significant change in the funding. So this whole narrative that somehow funding is the issue, funding's not the issue. The issue is policy. And the policies that have been implemented by this administration and your department in particular, have led to this catastrophic failure of our immigration in the United States, where you have a 400% increase in the number of encounters at the border with the same amount of money, both in fiscal year 20 and 21. Now, in fiscal year 22, things got even worse. There are 2.378 million encounters at the border. And we also know there's been a significant increase in the number of gotaways to the point where almost 2 million people are in this country that we haven't the faintest idea who they are. We don't know where they came from. We don't know where they are, and we don't know why they're here. Again, Director Wray, does that pose a threat to the security of the United States? The fact that there's 2 million people here, we don't know who they are, why they're here, what they're doing here. Have you got any worries about that?
Well, certainly the population that you're talking about is a source of concern for us.
All right, one other question for you, Director Wray. You say that the FBI, you work on detecting threats, et cetera, to the United States and the homeland. Exactly why are you doing that? What is the purpose of detecting threats and mitigating threats to the homeland?
Well, our mission is to protect the American people and uphold the country.
Very good. Protecting the American people. That's exactly right. Do you know how many people, the number one terrorist organization that has killed the most people in the United States, you know what that is?
That would be Al Qaeda.
And how many people have they killed? Americans?
Well, in the neighborhood of 3,000.
3,000. Okay. Across the border, there's the Mexican cartels. They are pumping fentanyl into the United States. You know how many people they've killed?
I don't have that number, but it's eye-popping.
It is eye-popping. And so, again, the failure at the border, the failure of us taking significant action, not only to stop the flow of illegal immigrants, and a lot of them we don't even know who they are, that it poses a threat to the United States. The actual threat of the cartels that are not 7,000 miles away, they're 20 miles away, they're 5 miles away on the other side of the border, that are killing tens of thousands of Americans every year, and we do nothing about it. Nothing. They're right there. We know who they are. We know where they're operating, and we do nothing about it. That is a dereliction of duty, Mr. Chairman. And with that, I got one more. If you give me one more thing, real quick, okay? Guns, planes, missiles, personnel, ships, boats, assassins. They all have one thing in common. Ms. Abizaid, do you know what that is? It's money. Money. That's what they have in common. So I'd like to know why the Secretary Blinken signed off a waiver for Iraq to purchase electricity from Iran, which will give them $10 billion in revenue. And that's a rhetorical question. Thank you.
Okay, the gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Thanadar from Michigan, the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Transportation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I thank Ranking Member Thompson, both of you, for having this hearing today. I also want to express profound thanks to the most honorable witnesses for your valuable efforts that give the people of this great country the safety they need to have prosperous lives. As we discuss threats to the homeland here today, it looks like we will more likely avert a shutdown this time. But for the second time this year, the dysfunctional Republican majority has brought our government to the brink of a shutdown after weeks of infighting. Funding our government 45 days at a time has consequences. At the Transportation Security Administration, thanks to funding Democrats provided in the last year's omnibus spending bill, workers are finally receiving the pay they have long deserved. However, pay increases were only funded for the final quarter of fiscal year 2023. So continuing at fiscal 23 levels instead of passing a full year spending bill will have increasingly dire consequences for the agency. Secretary Mayorkas, thank you for working with Congress to provide pay raises for TSA workers. What benefits is TSA seeing so far from pay raises, and what consequences would you expect to see if Congress does not provide funding to increase TSA's budget for fiscal 24?
Thank you very much, Congressman, for your concern for the men and women of TSA. I want to thank Ranking Member Thompson for championing fair pay for that workforce for many, many years, and I'm grateful to Congress for achieving fair pay finally. It has made a significant difference in the recruitment and retention of personnel who are vital to the security of the traveling public. If we lose that funding, we will return to recruiting and retention challenges precisely when travel is booming once again in a post-COVID-19 world.
Thank you, Secretary. And I, as a former business owner, I understand the importance of making sure the employees get paid fairly and they have the benefits that they need, because we are competing for these employees with the private sector, and they can always walk. And we have seen a high level of turnover in the past, and that will continue, and that will endanger our safety. But more broadly, for all witnesses, how does continually funding the government by short-term continuing resolution affect your agency's ability to execute your missions? I mean, I ran businesses and I never planned for 45-day budget. Usually it's a year, 2-year long, some also have a 5-year plan. That's how most businesses operate. How does this short-term funding affects and how you run your agencies, and how does that affect our national security?
Congressman, very difficult to plan. in the implementation of important security-related and security-focused initiatives when one does not know with certainty whether the funding for those initiatives will actually come through. I should also add a different element of this. It creates tremendous worry and instability within the workforce. In fact, for example, our Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction office, I had an all-employee town hall with them because they were uncertain about their future employment. That is not a situation that we can afford at a time when we need to advance the security of the American people.
Thank you.
I would add to Secretary Mayorkas' comments that the funding approach that you're describing is incredibly disruptive to our operations. As you say, planning is an essential part of any well-functioning organization, and it's very, very hard to do that. And I would second the concerns about our workforce. As you know, more and more you have federal employees who are two federal employee couples, for example, and in a lot of places they're living paycheck to paycheck. So even with the law that was passed that ensures they will eventually get paid, which is a welcome development,
Yes.
In the short run, that's incredibly stressful for people who are battling to put food on the table and keep a roof over their families' heads.
Thank you.
And I would only add, I completely associate myself with my colleagues' comments. I would only add that, you know, what we've described is a pretty unpredictable global environment right now. And in the national security world, we need sort of a steady baseline from which we can operate and respond to crises. And so the added stress on the workforce of just being able to understand when and where their paycheck is coming from, I think is one that we don't want to really put on their shoulders.
Thank you so much. I'm over my time, so I yield back, Chair.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Pfluger, the gentleman from Texas and the chairman of the Subcommittee on Counterterrorism, for 5 minutes.
Director Abizaid, thank you for your service. I'm not going to have questions for you today. Mr. Chairman, we started this hearing by listening to Secretary Mayorkas talk about climate change as a threat to our country and obscure policies that need reauthorization, but not yet one mention of the southwest border and the 169 plus known or suspected terrorists that have entered this country. So I think it just shows you where the mindset is, and the American people know that. Director Wray, you said in front of the Senate committee last week, and you said again today, the reality is that terrorism threat has been elevated throughout 2023, but the ongoing war in the Middle East has raised the threat of an attack against Americans in the United States to a whole other level. Do you stand by that statement?
Absolutely.
If somebody is listed as a special interest alien or a KST, by the way, this is Trump era KSTs and this is Mayorkas Biden era KSTs. If somebody's listed as a KST, is that a concerning person, somebody who could do harm to the United States?
Well, to be on the watch list as a KST means that they've met the standard to be of concern.
So they're concerning to the FBI. You're looking for these people.
Yes.
Are there people that are listed in these numbers? I think the number was 169. They may have amended that from CBP DHS, but are there people that you are still searching for that we don't know where they are in the United States? Of the known apprehensions, KSTs, known or suspected terror people, match list to the terror watch list.
Well,
are you still searching for people in the United States that we know match the terror watch list?
I'm not sure I can answer that here because it's a constantly moving
Director
target.
A?
Yes.
Are there people that match the terror watch list that were apprehended by CBP that the FBI and other agencies are searching for in the United States?
There are certainly individuals who are the subject of terrorism investigations that we are searching for.
Are there
Whether or not they're people, to me, I guess the distinction I'm drawing is, well, there's obviously a lot of focus on the watch list itself. One of the things that, and I've tried to be clear in my testimony here this morning, one of the areas that we are of concern is individuals who once here, information later comes in.
Are there people that you don't?
Those
Are there people you
have,
don't know where they are that the FBI is searching for today?
Yes.
Yes or no? Yes. Secretary Mayorkas, is there a policy at DHS that requires CBP or any other agency involved with the vetting of individuals who match the terror watch list that requires these individuals to be detained? Does DHS have a policy of detainment for anybody who matches the terror watch list?
Congressman, on September 30th of 2021, I promulgated a policy that articulated quite clearly and quite expressly that individuals who pose a threat to the public safety.
Is there a policy at DHS and CBP that requires detainment of people who match the terror watch list? It's very simple.
That individuals who pose a threat to public safety or national security are a priority for enforcement. And if, in fact,
is every person that you have listed on the terror watch list detained right now?
And if, in fact, they pose such a threat, they are to be detained.
Okay, so why did you release people in the United States that match the terror watch list?
Congressman, we do not release individuals.
So you have detained every single person who matched the terror watch list that you apprehended at the southern border? 100%.
If you would allow me to answer the question.
Please answer it quickly. I don't need a filibuster.
If we believe that the detention of an individual is necessary to safeguard the safety of the American people, we continue to detain
Secretary, I'm going to reclaim my time. If you and any other agency labels somebody as a match to the terror watch list, do you immediately detain them?
Congressman, if you are referring to the terrorist screening data set, the TSDS, we make a determination in the execution of our law enforcement responsibilities to detain an individual if that detention is
I believe that based on your testimony, based on Director Ray's, that there are people that you're still searching for that you should have detained. And I want to find out more information on it. Furthermore, in 2023, your agency, Secretary Mayorkas, reported that there were over 24,000 Chinese nationals who have entered the United States illegally. That's 1,000% increase from 2022. Are there people that you are searching for, Director Ray, Secretary Mayorkas, that have entered this country? And is there intelligence to suggest that the CCP is trying to use or directing the flow of CCP or Chinese nationals into the United States?
Well, certainly there are individuals who are affiliated with the Chinese government who are the subject of investigations that we have here, and some of those are people that we're searching for. Now, how they came in, whether they came in illegally or not, is a different question. I'm not sure I can speak to that here in the aggregate. But what I can tell you is that I've been very consistent in saying that there is no country that presents a broader, more comprehensive threat to our economic security, our national security, our innovation than the Chinese government. And they use non-traditional collectors, not just traditional intelligence operatives, to cause that threat.
Secretary Mayorkas, based on Director Ray's testimony, that he believes that this threat is at a whole other level and you are not detaining people immediately, I am very concerned about the security of this nation and the fact that you have been derelict in your duty in securing.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Carter. Or you went already. Okay. I now recognize Mr. Magaziner, the ranking member for counterterrorism, the gentleman from Rhode Island, for his 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for your leadership and to the men and women who work under you, who keep our nation safe every day. You have our gratitude. And to Ranking Member Thompson and Chairman Green as well for calling this hearing. The Director of National Intelligence has assessed that racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists present the greatest terror threats to our country. And I believe in your opening statements, our witnesses verified that assessment today. Racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists present the greatest terror threats to our country. Yet, as I've been listening, not one member from the other side of the aisle has focused any of their remarks or questions on what the DNI and our witnesses have identified as the greatest terror threat to our country. So I'm going to spend my time today talking about this and asking you about it. Because we know that over the last 5 years, more Americans have been killed on our soil by racially motivated extremists than any other type of terror. We saw it in El Paso, Texas, where a racially motivated extremist killed 23 people in an attack explicitly targeting Latino and immigrant communities. In Buffalo, New York, where a racially motivated extremist targeted the black community killing 10 people. Allen, Texas, where an extremist espousing anti-Semitic and neo-Nazi ideology shot up a mall, killing 8 people. Over the past decade, 145 Americans killed on U.S. soil in domestic extremist attacks, primarily racially and ethnically motivated. The FBI currently has 2,700 open domestic terrorism cases, and anti-government extremism poses a growing threat as well. We just learned the horrifying news that an associate of a January 6th defendant pleaded guilty to conspiring and plotting to murder 37 FBI employees in Chattanooga for the admitted purpose to retaliate against government conduct. And of course, in the wake of the October 7th Hamas terrorist attack in Israel, we are seeing a significant rise in anti-Semitic and Islamophobic violence across the country. The Anti-Defamation League reports that anti-Semitic incidents of harassment, vandalism, and assault have increased by 388% over the same period last year. Just this week, a Michigan man pleaded guilty to threatening to commit a mass shooting against the Jewish community. The Council on American Islamic Relations has similarly reported a 216% increase. And of course, we are all familiar with the tragic death of a 6-year-old Palestinian American who was horrifically killed in a hate crime a few weeks ago. So, given that this has been identified as the greatest terror threat facing our country, I'd like to give each of you an opportunity, starting with Director Wray, to talk about specifically racially and ethically motivated extremism. What is the nature of this threat, and what does the FBI need from Congress in order to meet it?
So first, a point of clarification. And when we talk about the greatest threat to the homeland is lone actors or small groups, typically radicalized online using easily accessible weapons to attack soft targets. And that group of lone actors includes both, as you rightly say, domestic violent extremists, as well as, though, that's the clarification, homegrown violent extremists who are individuals here who are inspired by foreign terrorist organizations. So that's what we call it at the highest threat level. Second, when it comes specifically on the domestic violent extremism side, domestic terrorism side, it is the case that over the last several years, the most lethal activity has been conducted here in the homeland by racially motivated violent extremists in terms of the most lethality. And then there's a second category, which you also noted in your question, which is anti-government, anti-authority violent extremists, which is distinct, sometimes overlaps a little bit, but it's distinct from the racially motivated.
Is that, for example, what we saw on January 6th, the anti-government or inspired by?
That would be one variation on it, but so would the violence that we saw in the summer of 2020. Anarchist violent extremism is all in the category of anti-government, anti-authority violent extremism, and we've seen a lot of both. And so the volume in that category is probably the greatest. Mm-hmm. The lethality is probably the greatest on the racially motivated violent extremist side.
Secretary.
Congressman, let me share with you some of the work we are doing to combat this threat. We're working very closely with our federal partners, notably the FBI. We're working with state, local, tribal, territorial, and campus law enforcement, our frontline personnel. We are engaging with communities in developing best practices for prevention models to be able to intervene when individuals are seeing somebody descend down a path of radicalization to violence. We are, thanks to the support of Congress, distributing grant funds to nonprofit organizations. In fact, we have sought a $200 million increase in that critically needed grant program, the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, to enable nonprofit organizations, including places of worship, religious schools, to secure themselves. We have protective security advisors in every state providing advice as to how facilities, places of gathering can best secure themselves. Those are some of the steps that we are taking to combat this threat in an environment of critically needed partnership.